Welcome to Athens Happens. I'm Ben Peters, a news editor at The New Political. Athens Happens is a weekly news podcast brought to you by TMP reporters dedicated to explaining the nuances of Athens and state politics. Today, we're going to discuss a forum that featured Athens incumbent Mayor Steve Patterson and Democratic socialist challenger Damon Krane, who repeatedly denounced both local landlords and Patterson, and a TNP columnist's opinion on Speaker of the House of Representatives Nancy Pelosi's decision to open a formal impeachment inquiry into Donald Trump following a phone conversation he had with the president of Ukraine. First, we're going to discuss the mayoral forum, wherein Democratic Socialist candidate Damon Krane repeatedly denounced both local landowners and Athens incumbent Mayor Steve Patterson. I'm here with managing editor Cole Behrens and staff writer Zach Zimmerman, who both attended the event. How are you both?
Doing dandy.
Doing fantastic.
Great. Dandy, Mr. Behrens?
You gotta go with that every time.
So, Zach, who were the two candidates at this event, and why are they significant?
So Steve Patterson is the incumbent mayor. He has been a figure in the Athens community for quite some time now.
Mm-hmm.
Many would consider him to be a very establishment candidate in the local political community. And then you have Damon Krane, who is very much so an outsider.
Mm-hmm.
He owns a food truck.
He does.
So he's very...
The hot potato food truck.
Just outside the college gate this morning.
Yeah. He... most of his campaign is centered around a anti-landlord rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
He considers himself to be a socialist.
A democratic socialist.
A democratic socialist, yes. So there, even though there are no Republicans running in the race, the two candidates are very different from each other. So
yeah, and elaborating on that, it appears that Mayor Steve Patterson is positioning himself as the conservative in this election. Obviously, with a more progressive candidate like Damon Krane, he's going to appear more conservative by comparison. But when you actually look at the way the rhetoric he used at the forum, he described himself as a fiscal conservative with your money, which, is obviously rhetoric that you would see from somebody who's conservative.
Or a Republican.
Yeah. But he definitely seems to be more moderately positioned than Damon Krane. He focused a lot on infrastructure, and less so on the policy issues that Damon Krane is talking about.
So Damon Crane's big policy, we've previously mentioned this, is he is staunchly anti-landlord. He calls Athens landlords slumlords.
He doesn't call Athens landlords slumlords. He says that some landlords are slumlords because they engage in predatory renting practices and overall violate city ordinance relating to health and safety of their tenements, and that some of them, don't give you your safety deposit back. Some of them, just exploit the renters, who many are first-time renters. And the city council, as we know, recently passed the legislation, which Damon Krane claimed was stealing his platform, that the legislation that increased the penalty for landlords in Athens.
Landlords who don't follow housing
landlords who don't abide by housing codes, not just landlords in general.
Yeah.
And that is pretty much, that makes up most of his campaign. His stances against landlords, he will use that and try and tie it to anything. I recall during the mayoral forum, he was answering a question about the environmental policies of Mayor Patterson and here in the city of Athens. And he managed to tie it back to landlords and the certain housing regulations and stuff. He tries to mention it as much as possible. He tries to tie landlords as much as he can to Mayor Patterson. He called out, I believe it was John Wharton and Alan McMillan.
Who were both in the
Who-
audience.
Alan McMillan was in attendance. I did not see John. I did not see John Morton. He actually pointed at, and insulted Alan McMillan. Called him the Koch brother of Athens. He called John Morton and Alan McMillan the Koch brother of Athens, which Alan McMillan he laughed at that. But then he used at the same time. He also then turned his attention to Steve Patterson and accused him of impropriety, not just in the city life, in the city aspect as a politician, but also as in his time as an Ohio University psychology professor. Now, he was issued, Mayor Steve Patterson, according to the Athens News, was issued a censure some 10 years ago, maybe
I think it was 7.
7 years ago, for falsifying publications that he was allegedly published in, on his curriculum vitae for tenureship.
And do we know how that concluded?
Yeah, the university board had basically stated that they couldn't prove wrongdoing because the incident had happened 10 years prior to the hearing board, but they did have reason to suspect that there was wrongdoing on Steve Patterson's part.
And so Damon Krane unearthed this allegation at the forum?
He certainly referenced it, and he delivered a couple other political strikes, I guess, for lack of a better word, towards Mayor Patterson, but that struck me as the most prominent one.
So if Mayor Patterson seems to be positioning himself as more of the moderate or even conservative, as he has said himself, what demographics are Damon Krane trying to appeal to?
Students, absolutely. Students.
He's had a text campaign for students. I know you received one.
Yes, I do not know how he managed to get a hold of my phone number. I've had several other members of the new political staff tell me that they too received texts from his campaign.
I also wonder where he's getting these phone numbers from, because it just seemed like they're like texts en masse. That'd be interesting to see where those numbers are coming from.
Has Patterson made any advances to try to appeal to student demographics?
A lot of students don't vote, so that's a large aspect. And I guess Steve Patterson already has his
base,
his political base in Athens, which is progressives in Athens. And the Damon Krane is trying to tap in and start some sort of political mobilization of students in order to combat what he says are predatory housing practices.
And students are the primary recipients of
Yes. 80% of Athens residents, according to Damon Krane, are tenants in rental units. And I would wager that a majority are students, but we also can't diminish the percentage of Athens residents who also rent from landlords.
Were there any particular reactions from the crowd at this forum? Any big moments that stuck out to you?
I will say, it appeared as though many of the people that were in attendance appeared to be taken aback by some of the claims. I do think that the forum was a little more outlandish towards each of the candidates than the people probably anticipated.
Well, we can't forget that the format of the forum was that all the questions were submitted by people in attendance on sheets of paper, and they had the League of Women Voters sorted through each one of them and obviously removed duplicate questions, but there were several questions in there. It was an interesting format because it could have very easily been gamed by Patterson or Krane supporters in order to give a favorable question to either of them. I mean, that's their prerogative to have it that way, but...
How many questions did media personnel get to ask?
Each member of the media panel got to ask one question each. So I asked Mr. Patterson and Mr. Krane about the closing businesses along Court Street and taking that into consideration with the declining student enrollment at Ohio U, what they would do to prevent any type of downturn in the local economy. Several of the questions had to do with student safety. So,
and going back to what I just want to readdress a previous point I had made. One of the questions that struck me with that sentiment that maybe that there was partisan activity in the questioning was one of the questions was along the lines of the Democratic candidates have refused to accept money from big industry. If you were elected mayor, would you accept political donations from large scale people in Athens? And then Damon Krane got to address the question first and use the opportunity to this was his big closing speech denouncing Mayor Patterson and Alan McMillan and John Warden, which the question seemed very, very conveniently written.
How so?
It was worded, I suppose, in a way that could have favored one of the candidates in terms of a response.
Were there any other big moments that stuck out to you guys here? Anything super newsworthy? Maybe something somebody said, a reaction from one of the candidates, maybe?
I think that when Damon Krane mentioned Steve Patterson had been censured by a professional ethics committee for including the false publications on his CV. I think many people were taken aback. I don't think as many people realized that or had any knowledge of that. So I think people were taken aback. I think that during his final speech, I think when Mr. Krane started denouncing Mr. Patterson, he started giving out statistics, and correct me if I'm wrong, Cole. He said something along the lines of...
The point that he was trying to make was that it was an uncontested election and that Mayor Steve Patterson had been generating campaign revenue from landlords when he didn't need the money to even campaign.
Okay.
So, and then what struck me was a portion when Damon Krane described how he wanted to remove guns from police and overall scale down the police presence in Athens. And Mayor Steve Patterson, when it was his turn to speak, he said, well, frankly, that's quite utopian, or something along those lines. It was really the only time that evening when I felt like Patterson really actually addressed what Damon Krane was saying, and instead of just delivering his own points.
And that was before the weekend incident with APD.
Yes. Yes.
Which, interesting. Is there anything else you guys want to add to this?
I think that Damon Krane gave very blunt answers throughout the course of the event. I think that Steve Patterson gave a lot of answers that may not have been as thorough. Nonetheless, they were clearly differing opinions from each other. So,
interesting. Well, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you both coming on here.
Thank you, Ben.
Should be an exciting election season.
Hello, everyone. I'm Maggie Prosser, editor-in-chief here at The New Political. Each and every day, I work alongside reporters, editors, producers, and managers who put their heart and soul into the journalism we produce. Here at TNP, we have the honor to tell the stories of the residents of this small town we call home. We're looking for local businesses and other ventures to help us continue funding for our independent journalism, including the podcast you're listening to right now. TNP would love to advertise for you through our website, our biannual magazine, or right here on Athens Happens. If interested, please send an inquiry email to exec@thenewpolitical.com for more details. We hope working together can support both your initiative and fuel TNP's strong, reliable, and essential journalism here in Athens.
Please note that the views and opinions of this columnist do not reflect those of the New Political. Last week, Speaker of the House of Representatives Nancy Pelosi announced a formal impeachment inquiry into President Donald Trump following a whistleblower complaint filed in the intelligence community concerning a phone call between Trump and the president of Ukraine. Opinion columnist Zach Richards recently wrote about Congress possibly pursuing impeachment, and he's here to tell us about it. How are you, Mr. Richards?
Pretty good. Great day so far.
Yeah?
Yep.
So before we begin and you share your opinions, I just want to explain to everybody how the impeachment process in the United States Congress works. So first what happens is the House leadership, which is what Nancy Pelosi is doing right now, opens up an impeachment inquiry, which means that they're going to begin investigating to decide whether or not they want to hold a formal vote to charge the president with articles of impeachment. Once they formally vote that, which requires a majority vote in the House of Representatives, it then goes to the Senate. The Senate will hold a trial to decide whether or not they want to remove the president from office. And if they pursue their trial, they decide, okay, it's time to hold a floor vote. They need 2/3 of the body is required to remove the president from office. So, Mr. Richards, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about the Democrats now opening up the doors to impeachment, to possibly in the coming weeks, months, holding a floor vote to impeach the president?
It's very interesting and very exciting time. You gotta think that Nancy Pelosi refused to hold articles of impeachment with the Mueller investigation and the whole Russia report. And what you've seen recently is an increase in support in the polls, mostly among Democrats and independents and a bit among Republicans.
That's just this past week.
Just in the past week.
After they announced that they're going to pursue this inquiry.
Yeah. So what you've basically seen is that it's risen from around 35% support for impeachment to basically 45 or even 50% support.
Depending on the poll.
Depending on the poll, yes. And it's an interesting scenario because how I personally feel about this is that what Trump did with Ukraine and calling President Zelensky was a very blatantly corrupt act in my view. Imagine it, replace Zelensky with Putin and Ukraine with Russia, and this would have been the smoking gun of the Mueller investigation. You literally have a White House transcript basically confirming that the president called a foreign leader and pressured him into interfering with an American election. Mm-hmm. And that is deeply corrupt behavior. The question is whether or not that rises to the level of impeachment, whether that rises to the level of corruption where the president should be removed from office. And I feel like that should be an inherently high bar because removing a president from office, in a way you're sort of disrupting the democratic will, in a way it's very disruptive for the whole political process, and in a way it's disruptive for the entire world. You have a change in leadership with one of the most powerful countries in the world. And so you have to set a high bar for it. And I think what the House needs to do is investigate to see whether or not there was a quid pro quo. Mm-hmm. The quid pro quo being, did the president pressure Ukraine to dig up dirt on Joe Biden's son? And in exchange, he wouldn't withhold military aid. Mm-hmm. If he was withholding military aid unless they investigated his son, that's the quid pro quo. And that not only is that interfering with an election, that's also a national security issue. And that's basically, that is plain and simple, the president mistreating his powers, abusing his power. Mm-hmm. And I think that would rise to the level where the president should be removed from office. And I think what the House needs to focus on now is finding evidence as to whether or not there was actually a quid pro quo, because there's a few things to go either way right now.
Okay, so if the House investigates, they come to the conclusion that there was no quid pro quo, are you still in favoring of actually holding a vote to impeach?
I would say not. I would say there's an alternate to this, which is a lot weaker than impeachment. It's for the House to just pass a resolution condemning the president's actions. They could do that, although there's a good argument to be made that that's not nearly enough, because even without a quid pro quo, it's a very corrupt act. But I sort of think about this in the context of the Clinton impeachment 20 years ago, that that President Clinton wasn't exactly completely innocent himself. He did lie under oath, and there was an argument for impeachment, but at the same time, I don't think he should have been removed from office. And I think that's the same thing going on here with Trump.
So both Trump and wide swaths of the GOP have been loud on cable news and social media for the past week, just completely trying to, what would you say, disparage this impeachment inquiry. How do you feel about that?
Well, on some cases, it is a bit disturbing when the president goes as far as to threaten a civil war if he's removed from office. That is, I won't say frightening because I'm not sure if it's going to cause anything, but that is a bit disturbing. It's very disruptive to our norms and shows, in my opinion, what Trump's actual priorities are, that he cares more about hanging on to power than the actual legitimacy of the rule of law. And I think there's also been some lesser things. There's been some subtle threats to the whistleblower. I don't like that. There's been, I think it honestly just shows the will of the Republican Party right now that we know for sure, basically, that Trump pressured a foreign leader to interfere in our election. But because there was a quid pro quo, they suddenly defended as if this whole thing is okay and he did nothing wrong.
Well, but because they believe that there was no
because they believe there's no definitive proof that there was a quid pro quo, although there is the transcript does have this line from Zelensky: "We are almost ready to buy more javelins from the United States for defense purposes." And then Trump responds, "I would like you to do us a favor, though." That seems to really imply a quid pro quo, but at the same time, there's evidence to suggest that there maybe wasn't. If you read the transcript from the perspective that Trump's just says whatever comes to his mind and he doesn't have any organized train of thought, then there probably wasn't a quid pro quo. But if you're viewing it as like him being a mafia boss and subtly implying things, then there definitely was a quid pro quo. And I think it needs to be established more firmly that there was a quid pro quo right now. And I think that's what the House investigation should be for.
How do you feel about the New York Times publishing some subtle information about the whistleblower?
Well, they need to protect the anonymity of the whistleblower at all costs, and it'd be journalistic malpractice to just flat out just publish their name,
which they have not.
They have not, of course, but they do need to be careful about that. Any journalist with access to that information has to be careful about that. Although I do think the whistleblower's identity will be revealed eventually because he has said that he's willing to testify before Congress. Yeah. And probably at least then we're going to find out who this person is.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to this, Mr. Richards?
Well, I would just like to add that Mitch McConnell can refuse to take up the trial in the Senate. If the House votes to impeach, he can refuse to take it up. He has said that he will take it up according to Senate procedure, but he could go back on that. And I think that would probably actually be best for Democrats is if he refuses to take it up, because then the Democrats can say to their base that they did what they could. But no matter what happens, it's unlikely that the Senate will vote to actually impeach, to actually remove Trump from office, because that would require 20 Republican senators to vote against him. And so it might be best for the Democrats if McConnell refuses to take it up, if Trump is never fully acquitted of the crime, and they can still satisfy their base.
Well, thank you so much, Richards. We really appreciate you coming on.
Appreciate being here.
And that wraps it up here on Athens Happens. Make sure to tune in every Friday for new episodes that shed light on the politics that impact all of our lives. Remember, you can find the show on the New Political's website, Spotify, SoundCloud, and on YouTube in a video podcast format. Also, be sure to check out our website at thenewpolitical.com, where we regularly report stories on what really happens in Athens, and follow at The New Political on social media. Thank you all so much for listening. We'll see you next week.
Hey all, Sarah Horn here. I'm the digital manager at The New Political. And if I had to pick the best decision I made as a college freshman, joining this outstanding publication would be it. At TMP, I've had the experience of creating both compelling written and digital content. My understanding of local politics has also immensely improved. TMP makes integration between written and digital work for staffers a priority and offers the unique opportunity to have a wide portfolio of clips. Not only that, but working for this publication helped me land an internship in Washington, D.C. as a digital productions intern for The Hill. Our publication is award-winning, independent, nonpartisan, and run by a dedicated team of student journalists. Apart from its content, the New Political has brought me some of my closest friends. The people who I work with make my job fun and fulfilling, and they never cease to amaze me with their kindness, collaborative spirits, and humor. If you too want to join the New Political, come to our all-staff meetings Sunday evening at 7 p.m. in Scripps Hall 210, or reach out to me at shorne, shorne, @thenewpolitical.com.